Hello, everyone. This is Dr. Shel Watts of MBAadmit.com. Welcome to our webinar with beatthegmat.com. We are always so happy to work with Beat the GMAT to give you great advice that can help you have success in the admissions process for your ideal MBA program. Today, we are here to talk about gaining admission to Harvard, Stanford, Wharton, and the top 10 MBA programs. This talk is tailored in particular for round 2. So we will discuss certain things that are going to be a little bit different than in round 1. We'll talk about some trends from round 1 and what you should do with that knowledge about how things went in round 1. We'll talk about the competitiveness level as we're seeing it so far. We'll also talk about how to use knowledge that you might have gained from watching round 1 admissions. And we'll talk to you about when applying in round 2, what sorts of things are much more important if you're trying to gain access to some of these top programs. Before we get into that, I just want to tell you a bit about our company. MBAadmit.com has been around for quite a long time. I've been giving advice for admissions for over 25 years. We've had success at all the top MBA programs, not only in the United States but around the world. And we have a very strong team of advisors, so we're always able to pull on that knowledge as we're advising our clients. We offer comprehensive services, so whether you just want an essay review, a mock interview session, or a full comprehensive service, which most of our clients come in for the full comprehensive service, we can tailor our services for your needs. We, again, have had success with all the top programs, and so we know the nuances and the special things that each of these schools is looking for in their candidates, and we use that knowledge to help our candidates to put together very strong applications. Feel free to go to our website and read about some of the experiences of our clients on our testimonials page. We welcome you to sign up for our newsletter. In a session like this, we're always limited on time, and therefore this is a very wonderful way for us to stay in contact with you and give you more tips that can help you in the admissions process. Just go to the far right-hand side of our homepage and feel free to sign up for the newsletter there. And then for you today, for attending the webinar, we are offering these special things. So feel free to go to our school's special page and you'll see the details of these offers. We're more than happy to give you a free profile evaluation. The form that you need to fill out is there. We're offering special pricing through November 11th for the round 2 services, and these are very low prices, so they won't be in effect too long. Be sure to take advantage of those if you're thinking about working with a consultant. And we're offering also a free eMBA book, so take a look at that. I'm sorry, a free ebook for the MBA admissions process, so go take a look at that and learn about some of the frequently asked questions and some of the responses that aid candidates as they're going through this admissions process. Finally, we do offer webinars, and so feel free to come to our website on the homepage, and we will give you instructions on how to connect to these webinars, as well as the dates that we will be offering those. And so let's get started today's discussion. This is the structure. We're going to talk first about trends, second about how to use the knowledge about what happened in round 1 this year to your advantage. Then we're going to talk about the areas of excellence you want to demonstrate to have success for top 5, top 10 admissions from Harvard, Stanford, Wharton, and again the top 10 MBA programs. We want to talk about school-specific interests, how you should try to familiarize yourself with those interests per school that you're applying to, and then how to use that knowledge for your advantage. And then finally, 5 high-impact steps to position you for success. So let's talk about trends. I know that many of you may be interested to know what did we learn from round 1. And these 3 jumped out at me from watching the outcomes so far. Now, many schools have not given outcomes yet. We're seeing some early decision results. We're seeing Harvard's results come out. And so we're getting a sense of things. So these are 3 things that stood out to me. First of all, this is good news for those of you who are reapplying, but reapplicants are getting a fresh look. People always have the question, you know, if I applied last year and I didn't have success, will I be penalized this year if I apply again with a stronger application? So far that I can see, the answer to that is you get a fresh look. So we've had great success with folks who were applying in early decision for Columbia, for instance. And so these are candidates that did not work with us the first time around, and therefore their applications had a great amount of room for improvement, and those candidates have been successful in getting in. I've been very happy to see that. We've also had some reapplicants to Harvard who may have been not clear admits but had really strong credentials, and again they're getting a good fresh look, and so that's nice to know that that's the case. So for those of you who are reapplicants, don't be bashful about reapplying to some of the schools that you may not have had good luck with last year. The key thing is figure out what was not strong and then try to address that this time around. The GMAT seems to be a little bit more important at some schools. This is not all schools, it's just some schools. And we do believe that that is a reflection of the fact that some of these schools are trying to move up in the rankings of business schools, and therefore they're just not willing to take candidates in with less than ideal GMAT scores. And so you should kind of look and try to find more information about this for your target schools. Are those the ones that you're looking at, the schools, are those among the ones that are being a little bit more picky on the GMAT? And if so, then be very careful about where your score is and whether that score is sufficient for you to be successful in admissions with your ideal schools. And then finally at Harvard, leadership has always been important at Harvard, but this past year, it seems to me, at least in round one outcomes, it seemed to be a defining attribute. And so if a candidate had outstanding academics, which in the past may have been sufficient to get admission to Harvard, but they lacked the leadership, that candidate seems stronger in prior years than they did in round one this year. So I do think that leadership is very important. And so if you're lacking in leadership, you need to be addressing in the next couple months, how do you demonstrate more leadership such that even if you have great academic credentials, you will be more attractive to Harvard. Competitiveness level, this is another piece of good news for you. I think it's a very typical year so far. It does not seem hyper intense and doesn't seem hyper easy. So basically it's a good year to apply. Now, some people ask what will make a hyper intense year. It's normally when the economy is bad because people are thinking they're about to lose their jobs, and so they start applying to business school hoping that they can get to business school before they lose their job. And so what you'll see is the numbers go up dramatically during bad economic times. So the fact that it's kind of an okay year, not great, not horrible in terms of competitiveness, is simply probably a reflection of the economy, that things are kind of stable at this point. So for those of you who are thinking, should I apply this year, should I apply next year, the fact that this is a reasonably good year and not hyper intense might make you want to try to do this now if all the rest of your application criteria is in line. It's probably a good environment in which to be submitting an application. In terms of other schools, the fact that some of the schools have changed their criteria for who will be successful means that if you're looking at, say, peers and colleagues and where they got in the past, that may not be holding true for you. So as we said, some of the GMAT scores are expected to be a little bit higher at certain schools, and so if you're looking at friends who got into a certain school with a 690, you really can't say that this year that 690 is going to be sufficient. So just be careful, try to do your homework, and try to make sure that you have a really strong understanding of what the schools are looking for, and apply to a couple more schools if you really want to go next year, just to broaden out your net so that you're going to most likely get more acceptances. Other trends which predated round one that you should be aware of that affect you this year are these. Many of the top MBA programs adopted shorter essays, and so what this means is that you've got less space in which to make a case for your admissions, and that is not a good thing for someone who has a weakness to override. And so you need to make sure that the content you're putting in your essays is really well chosen. So the strategy behind essay content is much more important. You also see common recommendation forms, which for most people is a very good thing. What this means is that many of the top MBA programs have adopted one form. So instead of last year when every single school had a different form in most cases, and some of them would have 9 questions, that would mean you'd write a 2,000-word recommendation. Some of them would have 11 questions, some would have 5, and therefore each of your recommendation writers would be somewhat overwhelmed writing all these different recommendations. This year, it's one recommendation form for many of the top schools, which means that once you have it written for one school, it's largely written for the others. You can do certain modifications that are school-specific, but it does relieve a lot of the work, and it means that you should be able to apply to more schools much more easily. Because the essays are shorter, and some of the schools actually have less content with the recommendations as well, it means that the non-essay portions of the application are much more important. What I mean by that is the GPA, the resume, application form, those are all important now. They were important before, but all the more so now. It also means that interviews are going to tend to be much more important as well because, again, you need to make a really strong impression. You've got less space in the essays to do that. The essays are going to be doing less of that work for you, so you really will need to do very well in the interviews. For those of you who feel you need to polish your skills, you should start to rehearse for your interviews as soon as you can. As they say, practice, practice, practice with interviews will make for a much more strong interview in terms of your performance. Finally, one additional trend, women do remain underrepresented in many of the top 10 programs, and that's good news if you're a female. It means that they're going to take a good look at you because the desire will be to increase the numbers of qualified women. Shorter essays, I want to take you through some of the topics here. Many of you may already be familiar with the essay topics, but just so you get a quick look at what the schools are actually asking, I'm going to walk you through some of these. I'll let you read them all the way through yourself, but Harvard basically leaves it wide open. It allows you to choose a topic. They say we can see all this other information from your resume to the transcripts. So what do you want us to consider additionally? And it leaves it wide open. So there is no right answer about how to approach this. It really is a candidate-specific thing. And I've seen candidates submit relatively short essays and also very long essays. It really just depends on your needs as a candidate. Stanford is just shorter. They used to have about 4 essays. Now they're at 2. And so these are the traditional ones that they've had all along. What matters most to you and why Stanford? Wharton has reduced to 2, and so it has the what do you hope to gain from Wharton and then the optional essay. So you must use those well. 900 word of content is not very much, and so you really do need to use this space very, very well. Columbia, again, has reduced the number, and so these are some of the essays here. The short response, which you definitely should put time into thinking how are you going to respond to this, because it is a weeding question, meaning they want to make sure that whatever your goal is reasonable given your background and your qualifications. And then they'll take you through some more Columbia-specific essays, and these are a couple of the ones that you're going to see. Tuck has one of the longer sets so far. So each of their essays is 500 words, and it's a typical why MBA, why Tuck as the first essay, a leadership experience which is distinct to Tuck at this point among many of the schools. Many of the other schools are not asking explicitly about a leadership experience. And so this one, essay 2, is going to take some thought, and then an optional essay. But Tuck actually gives you a very strong amount of content to make a case, and that's a good thing for the candidate. So bear in mind less essay content to work with, and so make sure to use that very well. The common recommendation, a very, very small amount of text compared to past years. In past years, it was not crazy to see a recommendation between 1,200 and 1,800 words as typical. So here you have 550 words. That means that what you're choosing to write in these 550 words is extremely important, and you want to make sure that your rec writers have a strong sense of what should be in there and to use each of those words very well to kind of get in as much strong endorsement of you as a candidate as you possibly can. impact. Impact of these changes we've talked about a bit already, the fact that when you have that much less content, that it shifts the importance of some of these other things, pure statistics. And so someone with a lower GPA, when you had a lot more content, 2,000 words of content in the past, you had a lot more space to try to explain why was your GPA lower, what are all some of the other reasons that you'd make a great candidate, and therefore it was easier to override a lower GPA. When you have less essay content and less recommendation content, it means that you are losing that opportunity to make that case as strongly, and therefore it may be harder to override that GPA. So just bear that in mind as you are putting your applications together. The recommendations, as we said, is prime real estate at this point, so you don't want to waste the words. Each of the points that are being made in the recommendations is very, very important. Other signs of success will become very important because, again, you have less essay content to make a case, and so they'll be looking for promotions, awards, other signs of professional success or recognition. They'll weigh more heavily in many cases the prestige of the company or organization from which you're coming. And again, the resume will be very, very important, as will be the application form. Those two must do some key work for you because you just don't have the essay content anymore. And then in general, my sense is because of these changes, it is a little harder to override weaknesses. However, looking at the round one outcomes, I've been very pleased to see folks with pretty notable weaknesses override them and be successful with Columbia early decision, with Harvard so far. And therefore, just because it does mean it might be a little bit harder, you have to make sure the applications are outstanding. It doesn't mean it's not possible, because we are seeing those successes in round one so far. So putting knowledge to use, this is an important one. Since you're applying in round two, you definitely want to take advantage of round one information. So how do you do that? Think about different types of knowledge that you might have. Here's some things that are personal. If you in particular applied in round one, you may have some outcomes already, or you may be getting some outcomes in the next few weeks, and you should take that information and use it if you need to. So say, for instance, you applied to a top school, say you applied to Columbia already in early decision, and you did not get admitted. That gives you information. So say they interviewed you, but you didn't get admission. That would tell you that they saw great merit in your candidacy, but something wasn't quite enough to get into the school. So the two key pieces of information: there's a lot of merit in your candidacy, but there's room for improvement. And so for you, figure out what those areas of room for improvement are before you put your round two application in. You should also note that if Columbia had said no, then maybe you should be targeting schools that are ranked slightly lower than Columbia. I wouldn't rule out a school like Wharton, because people do get into Wharton if they've been rejected from Columbia. So, but it just means you're going to be more realistic about what your odds might be to get into Wharton. And so, again, use the information to calibrate your school list so that you might get more admissions in round two. Other candidates, this is a useful set of information to draw on. What happened with your colleagues, your friends, your peers who applied in round one? So even if you did not, but they did, if you have a strong sense of their credentials, academics, their achievements in the workplace, what their recommendations might have been like in terms of enthusiasm level, what happened with their applications? Were they successful at some of these top schools that you're looking to apply to? And that, again, is knowledge that you can draw on to understand maybe how you might fare if you have a sense of how strong you are relative to them. And again, what does the profile appear to be for candidates that were selected for interviews? You can, again, use your colleagues and peers and friends to try to get a sense of this. You can also look at places like Beat the GMAT, where people self-report when they've been invited to interviews, and then they also give some statistics about themselves in terms of GMAT scores and GPAs. School information, you should be staying abreast, and you'll be able to go back and look and see what sorts of things were said in round one. But what are the admissions representatives saying in the blogs? And then also, hopefully some of you have had a chance to actually go out to the campuses already, and what are those representatives saying, and what are the current students saying? So that's all information that you can be using. So for instance, one of my current candidates did a school visit to a school in the South, and that school told her that they are focusing on improving their rankings, and so they're not very open to a low GMAT score at this point. So that for her is information she's going to use to understand what are her odds to get in given the fact that she has a low GMAT score. So she can take that information and use it to calibrate in terms of applying to other schools because her odds may be lower at that school. She knows that already they've communicated to her that their priority right now is moving up in the rankings, and so therefore that may not be a fit for her if she's trying to get in with a very low GMAT score. And so draw on that information. Go take a look at what is being said in the blogs by admissions representatives from the schools, and then also hopefully you do some campus visits and take a listen to what's being said also in terms of the admissions trends for the schools that you're most interested in. And then finally, interviews. Again, locations like Beat the GMAT will have information about who's being invited to interviews, and so you can get a sense of what is the GPA like at some of these schools, like what is the GPA that's the school's being very receptive to, and use that information again when you're trying to think through how competitive you are as a candidate. So aside from that, we're going to talk now about first 4 areas of excellence you want to demonstrate for success for top 5 and top 10 schools. And so on the whole, what you want to be demonstrating is that you are a top choice admit. Now when we say that, the question is, what do we mean by that? And that means that you've achieved excellence professionally, academically, and in extracurricular activities. You want to show that in terms of the past and the current and your future potential. So that becomes a very important thing to establishing that you should be a top choice for the school, that you have a lot to share. You do want to communicate through the essays and also through the recommendations that you have a lot of knowledge, experiences, and skills to share, that you have unique insights based on your experiences, that you're a creative thinker, you can bring great things into the classroom, and that you want to convince the reader, the admissions reader, that you're going to make a great impact not only as an MBA student, but in your career and also as an alumni of their business school. So all those are things that you should be striving to communicate through your essay content. Personal story, this is another dimension that on top of the factors that we just talked about, you want to stress your personal story if you have a strong personal story to talk about. And so by personal story, I mean personal achievements, your background, your storyline. Some people say, what if I don't have that? Almost everyone usually does have something, and so you need to just kind of talk through with someone your background and try to figure out what is distinctive about that background that you might want to showcase. And a personal story really can go a long way in helping you to override weaknesses. And so if you have that strong story, you should make sure to tell that. What is very important in round 2 as opposed to just round 1 is that by the time you're submitting your application, the schools will have already made admissions, and so some of the seats are already allocated, which means that the profile of the class is already taking shape. And so you will be applying with that profile already taking shape. And so given the fact that in their minds or in their internal communications, the school may have already decided, look, we're going to bring in 60 engineers and that's it. So if they already have 50 engineers and there's only 10 seats left in round 2 for the engineer, you need to be showing why you should be chosen as one of those 10 for the seat. And so what it means is that you don't want your application and your candidacy to appear to be interchangeable with thousands of other people who are also of the same profile. So for instance, if you are that engineer and you've got fewer seats to compete for in round 2, the personal story becomes all the more important. Are they going to remember you instead of the thousands of other engineers that are also applying? Do you stand out in terms of the personal story, in terms of your long-term goal, in terms of your achievements, in terms of your interests? So all those things that make you unique are things that you really need to stress much more in round 2, because that can make the difference between whether you're chosen or not chosen it won't be simply a matter of your GPA or your GMAT score. Among all the factors, though, so obviously uniqueness is a given, that we're assuming you're going to stress your uniqueness. Among the other factors we talked about, professional, extracurricular, academic, people often ask us which is most important. And usually it is professional success. It's business school, so they want people in there who have had great experiences, who have best practices to share, and who are very likely going to be business successes. And so the professional success is what gets them to identify that person. So you want to be stressing your professional success. Things, if you have a disjointed career, that can be an obstacle even if you have strong academics. So try to pay attention to how you're conveying your professional success and make sure to point out the signs of achievement. There are many ways that you can establish professional success, and so recommendations are very important. At MBAadmit.com, we believe that the recommendations can make a difference between admissions and not. We think that they are weighed as heavily as the essays, and so it's a very key way for you to convey that your superiors and the people that work with you are convinced that you stand out among your peers and that you're destined for success. And so you want to communicate that through the recommendations. You can also make references to your professional success in your resume, your essays, promotions, awards, and so forth. Now, so people ask, this is a very important question, so what do I do if I didn't get a promotion? You can still show success and progress, and that's the key. You want to show progression of skills. And so focus on the fact that you had expanding range and depth of responsibilities, that you achieved excellence in your activities. And then, again, the recommendation writers are important for conveying those things and also for talking about to what degree you bring unique insights to the workplace, and therefore to what degree you can do that also in the business school arena. Now, this question is, have we been able to help candidates with weak professional experience gain into admission to the top 5 or the top 10 MBA programs? The answer is yes, but it's very, very important how you write about the work experience. And so for us, when we get a candidate where we can see that their professional experience can put the application at risk, we are paying a whole lot of attention to how that experience is written about. And then also, hopefully we'll have the chance to take a look at the recommendation writers, their text, and then to help them understand what information is most useful for the admissions committees. So yes, it's very possible, but you really do need to pay attention to how you're presenting all of the information. Other weaknesses for top 5 or top 10 success, of course, and again, the application is just the pivotal tool for being able to override a weakness. So we have had many successes. I can come back to some of this information in the question and answer period at the end of the session, but just know that success is very possible. And again, success stories, we can revisit some of these if we have time during the question and answer. So school-specific interests. This is important, particularly in round 2, where you have already seats are allocated and you're competing for fewer seats. You need to show that, first of all, the program is a fit for what you need, and also be understanding whether you as a candidate and your credentials, your background, your experiences, whether that is attractive to your school. Now, even if you get the sense that there are certain things about your profile that are less attractive to the school, that does not mean you should not apply there. It just simply means you should have your eyes open, understand that the odds may be harder there, and therefore if you do want to attend business school next year, you would apply to other schools also so that you're increasing the odds of success. So here are some things that are nuances of admissions at target schools. And so things like your GPA. Some schools are just very intolerant to low GMAT scores. And I'm sorry, the GMAT score is what we're talking about. So some schools are less tolerant of a low GMAT score. They're just simply not going to take it in. Other schools may be willing to overlook it if the rest of the profile looks fantastic. Same thing with the GPA. Some schools are much more sensitive to a lower GPA than what they've kind of set as their standard, and other schools will give you more leeway. Age is a big factor, so some candidates at 33 simply won't be competitive for some schools. You need to know what schools those are, and it doesn't mean you shouldn't apply, but you should be realistic in understanding that they may look at you and simply say, based on age, that they don't think you're right for the program, and they may want to redirect you to a different program like the executive MBA. Here are some other factors. I'll just read those through: the professional experience and the number of years you have, your country of origin, your industry or specialization, the round. Some schools, by round 2, it's very, very difficult. Other schools are much more open in round 2. Your company and which company you're coming from. Those are all nuances of admission. And so know what the schools that you're applying to, what they prefer to see. And then if you are not those things, then just understand you may have harder odds. Be much more careful in how you're presenting your information. And then also broaden the number and type of schools that you're applying to try to get admissions if you want to go to business school next year. So again, I don't really need to walk this through. I can let you come back to this slide later, but how do the nuances affect admission? We've already talked about some of them. Some of the business schools skew lower, meaning they favor the younger candidate. They're more interested in the 26-year-old than the 34-year-old. Some of them are friendlier to entrepreneurs. Some of them really like candidates from the Fortune 500, Fortune 100 companies, and they don't really like people from small companies that they've never heard of. Some of the schools favor candidates from certain parts of the world, and so you need to know that, because if you're from Eastern Europe, you may have a better chance of getting admission in one school than another school, and that's information that you should be putting to use. So knowing the nuances can help you target schools that are more receptive to you, and you can apply to those schools as well as to other schools that you really want to attend, and then hopefully between the two sets you're going to get some admissions that you're very happy with. People often ask us, well, what are examples of nuances of admission? And I just picked out a few schools here. Harvard, of course, has always been focused on leadership. That seems to be even more the case, or all the more the case this year. Stanford likes candidates that are extremely unique and really who have great vision and are seeking to make a profound impact through their career. Wharton, I think it does take people from a broad variety of backgrounds. They do tend to prefer higher GMAT scores. Columbia, again, I think is open to candidates of a wide variety of backgrounds, and candidates from finance, entrepreneurs, and those from family businesses often are very well received at Columbia. And then INSEAD loves people who love global issues, who have a desire to have an international career, who are intellectually curious. That's sort of the INSEAD profile. So those are all nuances, and you should bear those in mind as you're putting your applications together. So let's talk about some high-impact ways to position yourself for success in the admissions process, particularly in round 2. And so the GMAT score, you have 2 months in most cases before the round 2 application deadline. And so take a look at your GMAT score. Is it strong enough? And if you think that you're right on the line and you also think that you can do better by 20 points, it may be worthwhile to take that GMAT again. Number 2, make sure you have excellent recommendation writers. The recommendations, as I said before, really, in our opinion, they're weighed as heavily as the essays, and they very well likely can make the difference between whether you get in or whether you're rejected. And so you need to take that very seriously. Take a look at who you can ask to write and make sure they're really willing to write an outstanding recommendation for you, and then make sure they know what that looks like, because some people who are not familiar with writing recommendations may be wanting to help you, but the recommendation they actually produce does not do that, and so you need to make sure that they are familiar with what a strong recommendation looks like. Research your target schools and create a timeline. Now round 2 is always, those deadlines are always early January, and so you're hitting that right after that vacation period. So some things that go wrong with the round 2 application process is people are kind of forgetting that their recommendation writers might be heading out on vacation on December 15th, and so they're thinking they have until December 31st to get the recommendation when in fact they have until December 15th. And so you need to make sure you're staying aware of those things and create a timeline that will allow you to get the work done to be able to meet those deadlines in early January. Number 4 is work early on the application form and the resume. Now, as we said this year, because the essays are shorter, these areas are more important. And so something that goes wrong often is people wait until the last minute to even look at the application form. And so you need to take a good look at it and start to work on it early. That will mean that you're not rushing at the end. There won't be typos or careless errors. The application form is the first thing that they see as they're reading through your file, and so you don't want needless typos and needless errors in that the first pages that they're reviewing as they're taking a look at you as a candidate. So do start those early when there's a lot less time pressure. Also the resume, because it does need to do some good work for you in terms of establishing your achievements and the experiences that you're going to be able to share at the school. Make sure to start that early so that you get to revise it, keep making it stronger, focusing on compelling language and your great achievements in the resume itself. Extracurricular record. People are always asking, well, can I really strengthen my extracurricular record when we are 2 months out from the deadlines? And I say even if you're 2 weeks out from the deadline, you're able to strengthen the record. And so there are ways that you can make your extracurricular record stronger before admissions, and you should take the opportunity to do that. We can talk in the question and answer about ways that you can do that, things that might be more high impact than others. But if you have the time, then take the time and try to make yourself stronger, because extracurriculars with the top schools, and again, the ranking of the school is going to determine how important the extracurricular record is, but certainly when you're talking about the top 5 MBA programs, this is very important, and it can make a difference between success or lack of success in the admissions process. And so if you have any opportunity to strengthen, you should take that opportunity. So I'm going to shift pretty soon into the question and answer. I do just want to say feel free to be in touch with us. And again, definitely get to our website, take a look at some of the specials that we have just for you. We are more than happy to do a profile evaluation, so just download the form there and get us that information. We're happy to give you feedback on your candidacy. But we do hope to hear from you, and we do hope you will sign up for the newsletter so we can stay in touch with you and continue to give you great tips for round 2 success. I'm about to move into the Q&A. Just a moment. And so some questions are coming in, and I'm going to take a look at some of those and give you all some responses to some of the questions that are being asked. So let's take a look at some of these. Okay, some of these are very specific questions, so just give me a chance to pull out some questions that most people will benefit from hearing about. Just one second. Okay, so someone asked, which schools really like candidates who are from entrepreneurial backgrounds? I would actually have to say among the top 10 that at this point many of them are going to be, or most of them are going to be interested in candidates who have an entrepreneurship background, because all of them are going to want some representatives from that background. However, there are some schools that do have special entrepreneurship focuses, and therefore you would potentially want to take a good look at those. And some that come to mind would be Harvard, of course, Wharton, Columbia, and Stanford. And so those are schools that they love to see great entrepreneurs. And so take a look at those programs, take a look at their specialties, and then understand that if you are already an entrepreneur, just make sure to convey the value of your experience to them very well. And if you're an aspiring entrepreneur and you're not actually in the field yet, then take a look at their offerings and try to convey to the school in your application, your interest in entrepreneurship and how that program might be ideal for you. Let me review a little bit more again to see a question that might benefit the most people. Okay, I have another question for the women in the audience today. It says, which schools do I think will admit females with 2 to 3 years of work experience? Well, I'm going to be very careful about how I answer this question. I actually find that with regard to work experience years and women, the schools tend to be more open to women having fewer years of work experience, and this is literally watching outcomes over the last 15 years. And they're more open to women having less work experience. And so if I have a woman who only has 2 years of work experience, I'm not necessarily nervous, because I know as long as she can convey what she's learned, that she's got a lot to share in the classroom, that those 2 years as opposed to 4 years is not going to usually stop her from gaining admission to top schools. And why is that? I mean, I think that the schools recognize that women have multiple life goals, I'll put it that way, and I won't elaborate, but they have multiple life goals, and therefore, for them, they're always kind of looking at age and being more mindful of where they are in terms of achievements in school and so forth because of age. So for that reason, I think women, the standard is a little bit different than for men. I guess I'm already hearing, even though I don't see the question here, I'm already hearing the men in the audience saying, well, what about us? Okay, so let me answer that question in terms of the men. 2 years of work experience, when I get a candidate with 2 years, I do get a little nervous. It's not that I won't work with the person, but I will say to them, you're at the bare minimum, and so therefore you have to convey that work experience really well. And so as long as we do that, we're taking very good care to what we're saying in terms of working through our explanation of the work experience. We're making sure the rec writers are communicating certain things. I've had success with candidates with 2 years of work experience consistently over these 15 years. And so last year, one of the first candidates that came to me with 2 years of work experience, that was a male, ended up on a full scholarship at Columbia. Another one who had 2 years of work experience and was in private equity in a very small company, which meant there would be thousands of people with his exact profile applying to schools. Again, 2 years of work experience, but we put the application together really well. He also gained admission to Columbia. And so, so the successes are from Harvard, Wharton, Stanford. Yes, I did have someone at Stanford who actually had 2 years, most of which was in a large company and the rest of which was in an entrepreneurship entity that he launched himself. So 2 years of work experience is at Stanford. So the 2 years can work, but you do have to write about it well. And if you don't write about it well, that's where I think it can hurt you, because you won't sound as if you necessarily have enough to share in the classroom. So it's all about presentation. All right, so let's take a look at some more of these questions. Okay, I have a question. In which of the top 10 schools is the GMAT score more important? That is a question I cannot answer without knowing the profile of the candidate, because the GMAT score is not important. There's no one-size-fit-all answer, I guess is how to say it, because for someone who is an overrepresented minority, so, and I mean just on an international basis, so say we all know the Indian foreign national male engineer is overrepresented. We have many, many, many candidates of that background applying to the top schools, and therefore the GMAT score is going to be expected to be very high, because the pool on the whole has very high GMAT scores. So for them, all the top 10 are going to be expecting a pretty nice number. As you get lower in the rankings, like school 8, school 9, school 7, there's going to be more leeway. For someone who is underrepresented, so in the United States, someone who is Hispanic or African American, where the schools tend to want a larger representation than they have, if you get a GMAT score that is less than the average, for instance, that candidate may still be viable if the rest of the profile is strong. So if they magna cum laude graduate, have a great work experience, they may very well still be competitive at Harvard. So it really is dependent on the profile. And so that's where, if you're working with a really good consultant, they can add the value because they will have worked with a lot of people over time, and then they'll know based on your whole package, does your GMAT score look strong enough, and if not, how much would you need to improve it to be competitive at the schools that you're interested in. But a good place to start is just look at the average, how close are you, and then the second question is, are you overrepresented? I mean, are there a lot of people of your profile applying, or are you underrepresented? And that can help you understand, do you need to be at the GMAT average, above it, or can you be somewhat lower than that as well and be successful? All right. Let's see. I think we have about 10 to 15 more minutes, so I'm going to go through more of these questions. Having a bit of problem looking at these questions, so it just takes me a little bit to get through this. Someone asked about GRE scores. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because I don't think most people are thinking about taking GRE scores. I do want to invite you all, though, if you have questions, I have a forum here on Beat the GMAT to go ahead and post your questions there. I'm more than happy to respond to your questions there. And I will actually go through this list that we're seeing that being sent in, and I'll actually start to do some blogs. So watch our blog list as well on our website and our newsletter. But in terms of the GRE, to answer that quickly, some schools are very skeptical about the GRE because they feel like they don't have enough candidates with the GRE to know what a strong score is. And so if you apply with the GRE, even though they accept it, they may be a little bit more nervous about taking it in, and if there's anything else about your record that is not speaking to strong academic performance, the GRE may not be sufficient. When I advise people about whether or not to take the GRE, I say basically if you simply cannot do well on the GMAT, you've taken it 5 times and you can't get above a 580, you know that at the top 10 schools, you're most likely going to be rejected on the basis of a 580 GMAT score by itself. And so you have nothing to lose at that point by switching to the GRE. And I literally have had candidates who were able to come back with, on the first try, and a GRE score of 85 percentile. And so they use that instead of the 580 from the GMAT, and they get access to interviews at Wharton. And so for them, it was a good choice because the 580 would have meant most likely a automatic rejection, and the GRE kept them viable. But pretty much it's only in those circumstances. If you really can't do well on the GMAT score, then shift to the GRE. There are some non-traditional candidates who took the GRE already and did really well, and so if that's your score, and then your academics are strong, I think it's fine also to apply under those circumstances with the GRE. All right, so let's see. Someone asked, okay, does your school and the prestige matter in terms of where your GPA is expected to be? Therefore, if you were at a prestigious, very competitive school, will they bear that in mind when looking at your GPA? And therefore, translating that even more specifically, say if you have a 3.1 from Princeton, as opposed to 3.1 from a school that's ranked in the 4th tier, will they be more open-minded for the person that was at the very competitive school? The answer is yes. And it's not only school, it's also by major. And so when I get engineers who come to me who have like a 2.8 sometimes, and they're thinking there's no hope for me, in the admissions process, we will just keep pointing out the major and how difficult that was. And they have had success with 2.8s, and these are overrepresented folks. And so very recently, I had a candidate who was American of East Asian heritage with a 2.8, and he was successful in getting into one of the top 3 schools because it was engineering extremely difficult, and his school was reputable. It was a good school. It wasn't a top 10 school, but it was a very good school. And so it is possible. Don't write yourself off based only on the GPA. You really should get some good feedback about how the schools might perceive and treat your GPA. So based on the school and also based on the major. Let's see. Someone asked about social entrepreneurs, which schools are much more open to social entrepreneurs. I would say, again, many of the schools that are in the top are going to be interested simply because that's an important area of growth that we've seen in innovation. But schools that are particularly known for that would be MIT, Yale, Harvard. Those are three that come to mind right away. I've definitely had other candidates be successful places like Columbia and even Wharton with social entrepreneurship. Stanford loves innovators and they love folks who are pioneers, and so again, if you convey your experience the right way, Stanford, there's no reason why that experience wouldn't also be attractive to a school like Stanford. Still looking to see some questions here. Someone asked whether it's too late to plan to apply for round 2. They haven't taken their GMAT score yet, a GMAT test yet, and the answer is no. You obviously need to book that very soon. Hopefully you've been preparing for it, and so as long as you've been preparing, then you can book your test date, and maybe that's 30 days away. Take that, and assuming it goes well, that you should be fine. If you still want to apply and you find that the score isn't where you would want, then you may have missed round 2 deadlines by then, because I think the second attempt might be coming too late. And so as long as you've been preparing, you think you can get a good score, you can go forward trying to get a round 2 application put together. One way to get a sense of how you might fare is just go ahead and take a mock exam and project your score. So even if you have not been preparing, if you do that mock exam and you score really well, because some people are just great test takers, you may still be in fine shape for a round 2 application. Okay, I'm trying to read this one question. I'm having a little hard time I think they're asking what percentage of candidates at Stanford have the wow factor. And I would actually say most candidates at Stanford have the wow factor because it's a very small school. It's like half the size of Harvard, and the expectation simply is that you're going to have really strong academics, and then that you are going to be extremely unique, because each one of those seats is very important. When I see a more what I'd call generic candidate, so generic might be, someone who had 3.8, a good GMAT score, went to a place like McKinsey and Company, did 2 years of experience. In that 2 years, they could not have led a team, because you're not at that point where you'd have led a team, so the leadership in the workplace is not strong. And they had good extracurriculars. I mean, to me, that's more of a generic. It's high achieving, but still generic in how that candidate looks. When you have that, to me, usually it's going to be someone who's an underrepresented minority, because the person may have come against phenomenal odds. They came out of the ghetto, they came out of poverty, and then they achieved that. So what would be generic for some other people is actually a very extremely, significant achievement for this person, given the personal obstacles they overcame to get there. So to me, that person still has a wow factor. And so I would say most of my candidates at Stanford have that wow factor. In terms of the other schools, I think this question was asking, they were saying not everyone can be the wow candidate, so for the other schools, then what percentage? And as I said, I think Stanford is most defined by that wow factor. The other schools, the high achievement is sufficient, and so if you have strong academics, if you have strong professional and extracurricular achievements, then you should be applying where you want to apply, not being too fearful that you're just going to get rejected, and just give yourself a good try. And then again, how you're presenting your credentials is extremely important. I get all the time candidates that think they don't have anything special to present, and then once we go into their background in greater detail, there's a lot of stuff to draw on, and so we end up putting forward some really strong applications, and so it's presentation is very important in the whole process. Okay, I'm going to look for maybe 2 additional questions. Let's see. Okay, I'm getting to many of these questions already. I'm trying to find one that I haven't addressed yet. Let me just scroll down and take a couple more seconds to get one that could benefit many people. Okay, this is a good one for everybody. So what should be on a resume? So I'll answer that very, very quickly. There is a difference, in my opinion, between a job resume and an application resume. And when you're with a school that is allowing you to do a 2-page resume, then you get to take advantage of that extra space by highlighting more of your extracurricular activities, because that's the main difference, that for a job resume, there simply isn't the space to go into detail on your extracurricular activities. But for the schools, for business school admission, they want to know that you did something in the extracurricular arena, and so you want that information on the resume. And so, knowing that they care about your job progression, that information should be there. They want to hear about how you did in college, that information should be on the resume. And then they do want to know, get a sense of what you did in terms of extracurricular activities, so that should be on the resume as well. So that's a very good question that I think many people can benefit from hearing that response. Okay, someone's asking a question about being at a small company, and I'm going to answer this one because I'm sure many people in the audience may be at small companies and wondering, how that's going to position them for schools. And it truly is how you talk about the work experience, because I'll give you an example. I had someone who was Canadian, and he was of East Asian heritage, but Canadian by citizenship, and he was at a company that had 4 people, so 1, 2, 3, 4, that's how big it was, 4, and it was in a very niche, very, very narrow industry. And if he had not written that about that experience well, I think he would have been dismissed at every top 10 school based only on the size and nature of the company, how narrow it was in its focus, and that would have been the end of the application. Now, when we worked together, I knew that there are certain things about that industry that could be applicable to all companies, and so we made sure to highlight that and talk about what he could share in the classroom because of that. And then we were able to tie that small company experience to his long-term goal really well. And by doing that, we increased the value of that work experience. And so he actually was successful at the vast majority of schools to which he applied, and those are anything from, they were included, Columbia, INSEAD, Tuck. I mean, it was just a really long list, London Business School. And so he was thrilled, and I know that how we wrote about that made all the difference between, getting in and not getting in. And so for those of you who are at the small companies, you shouldn't feel you can't be competitive. You just simply need to know that you must convey the experience in a way that the school is convinced that if they choose you for the classroom, you are able to help enrich the learning environment. So it's not just about you. It's not just about, can I benefit from being at the school? They want to know, will others benefit from your presence? And so you need to make sure that you answer that question. Let's go for one more question. Well, I might do two questions because one of them is very kind of specific. There may be people in the audience who are older candidates, and so this person wants to know, I really want to wait until next year, but I'm already 30, and so if I apply at 31, does that mean I won't be competitive? I think that when I get a candidate who is like 31, 32, 33, and they really want the full-time program, I definitely say apply where you want to apply. Take a look at your credentials. Where do you appear to be qualified to attend with a strong application? Because a strong application can normally get you to a school that's ranked higher than, maybe even your qualifications might suggest you can get. So we'll take a realistic look at, what schools should you have a really strong shot at. Let's apply to those. And keep a very open mind, because some of those schools may, based on your age, say, we're going to say no. And so in the worst case scenario, they apply to 3 full-time programs and they get no's. At that point, they have to decide, do I go lower in the rankings, or do I apply to EMBA programs and keep some of these great names? And so the EMBA programs could be MIT, Columbia, Wharton, University of Chicago. You're still at great schools. And so the person has to make a decision at that point, in that worst case scenario. Do I go EMBA or do I go lower in the rankings and stay with the full-time program? And that's a personal choice. The key thing to let you all know is that a lot of people think that if you get the EMBA, you go in that program, that your degree says EMBA, but that is not the case. In most cases, you are earning an MBA degree. And so if you get you go through the EMBA program at Wharton, you get an MBA. And so on your resume, you're the Wharton MBA. And so that's kind of a myth out there, is that you're having to say EMBA after you get this degree, and that's not the case. And so you do have to decide, do I want to stay with the prestigious school but go through the EMBA route, or go lower in the rankings and stay in a full-time setting? And that's, again, a very personal choice. Let's see. All right, so let's do one more question, if I can find one that's pretty broad. Okay, I see a question, I'm going to broaden it out. Okay, so this person is asking about if you have a challenge to explain, so lower GPA, career changes, and you have something like an illness, should you, that explains the low GPA or explains why you have to stop a career and go to something else, should you write about it? Now, I'm going to broaden that question out to be, when you have a challenge, should you be trying to explain it? And the answer in most cases is yes. And how you do that, whether you do it directly by just saying, here, look, I know you're noticing this weakness in my profile, and so I want to explain it, or whether you're going to do it indirectly. And there's just indirect ways to get to some of the same information. Then whichever way you do it, it is useful to let the committee understand, because oftentimes the school, there's certain explanations that the school will be very accepting of, and therefore you will override the weakness. And so I've had candidates with 2.8 GPAs get into Harvard, into Stanford, into Wharton with scholarship, into Columbia with scholarship, and it's because that GPA, there was a very strong and credible explanation as to why that happened. And in most cases, they will have established a record outside of that, whether through a one-year degree or through an alternative transcript with extension school courses, and quite a number of them all with mostly A's. But so they give the committee something else to look at in terms of academics, but they're able to explain the GPA. And then if it's one of these explanations that the school accepts, then they might be able to override that. And so if you do have something notable, some weakness that you think by itself will cause a rejection, you should be trying to address that. We are going to be addressing that whole issue of overriding a low GPA or GMAT score, and so please tune into our website and take a look at the webinar. I believe it's coming up in a couple weeks. We also have done a chat on Beat the GMAT about that, so feel free to Google Beat the GMAT and low GPA and Dr. Shel, and you should get to that transcript on Beat the GMAT, where we did a chat about overriding a big weakness and how you do that, and what sorts of explanations the schools will be receptive to, and which ones they won't be receptive to, and therefore it would be harder for you to override that weakness. So I think we're going to have to leave that there today. I definitely do invite you to post further questions in our forum here on Beat the GMAT. Feel free to reach out to us at our website, and definitely sign up for our newsletter. We will keep you aware of our webinars, and we're happy to give you more tips through the newsletter itself. So it's wonderful being here as always. Good luck in your admissions process, and feel free to reach out to us if there is anything that we can do for you.